Keep your wellness routine going strong all summer. Kachava's new travel packs help you stick to your daily ritual even when you're on the go. Just one packet of Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake provides complete nutrition wherever you are, with 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and more. Simplify your daily ritual. Go to Kachava.com and use code NEWS for 15% off. That's KACHAVA.com, code NEWS.
He's a retired police sergeant from the Lowell, Massachusetts Police Department. He was injured severely in the line of duty. He's retired on disabling, lifelong injuries. He's here to talk about difficulties and what a lot of people don't understand about the retirement process. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Of all the radio stations in the United States, there are no other shows like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, and be sure to like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. Joining us from Massachusetts, we have Vincent Fernandez. Vincent is a retired Lowell, Massachusetts Police Department. That has been an agency I know. I don't know a whole lot of agencies in Massachusetts. I know Boston, I know Lowell, and a couple other ones. That's about it. He was injured in line of duty and was retired and has lifelong injuries, kind of like me. And he's here to talk about unfairness in state laws and retirement. If you want to get more information about things that are happening in Massachusetts in particular, throughout the United States, go to vipo911.org. That's VIPO911.org. Vincent, thanks for your service, number one, and B, thanks for talking about it on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. But very much appreciated.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really, really appreciate the opportunity and the kind words.
How long ago did you retire?
It will be, it's 10 years ago in May.
So it's fair to say you're no longer a rookie of the retirement thing anymore.
Oh no. This has been a very prolonged process. Yeah,
here's the thing for me, and before we go into your career, I got hurt and retired in 92. I've been retired a very long time, and for me, I tell people this all the time. This deals more with the so-called hidden injuries or mental illness injuries, whatever. I was fine when I knew my job. When the drama and trauma was going on, I knew what to do. It's when things got quiet that the problem started. When I retired, it was a huge transition.
Yeah, I think it is. I think especially if you're a first responder and in law enforcement, you go to work one day, and if you're seriously injured, that's it. Like, your job ends on a moment's notice. And so there is no slow transition, right? You go from actively working to not working, and then,
right,
other things that come along.
And the other thing about it, before we get into your career, is that I became very close with the people I worked with. We became like family members. We went to their weddings. We went to christenings. We did all this stuff together. And life goes on. When I was injured and out of the job, I was gone forever.
Yeah, it's a sad truth, right? I mean, you're no longer a part of that family actively, right? Everybody wishes you well. You see them once in a while, and people say it's great to see you. You look good, but you're not part of that family. You're not part of those experiences. You're not part of the things that bond first responders together anymore.
No, you're not, and there's no way of sugarcoating. And I used to be very angry, very bitter at my coworkers. It turns out I was the one that left them, not the other way around. And they didn't do it. When we got together, it was like old home week. It's like no time had passed whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think that's an unfortunate truth. I think when we're separated from it, we feel alone. We feel like there's nobody out there that can understand what we're going through. And we feel like the people who we used to work with don't want to see us anymore. We're just a kind of a reminder of what could happen to them. And, those feelings seem to kind of, they come to the surface once you are forced to retire like that.
And by the way, I don't want to discredit, there are people that were killed doing this job, and their losses fell forever. And their family members, they feel that loss forever. And there are people like us, I consider myself in this crew, that are severely injured and lifelong disabilities, and we're not afforded the same level of respect, the same financial stuff, the same emotional stuff either. Was that fair for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good description of it. I think, there are a whole set of, financial, burdens that you begin to take on as well if you survive something. I think surviving, that particular violent encounter, in my case, a violent encounter, surviving that was easy, right? Because I think as a police officer, you're trained, right? You can do those things, right? You know what to do. Like your body kind of goes on its own. But what we don't know how to do is live after surviving that incident. And I think that's a really hard thing to do. And for someone's family, whether I survived or not, the impact is just as devastating, given the long-term health consequences that I've had.
We've had some mutual friends, Bob DiNapoli, Mario Oliveira, who both have been on my show multiple times. And look, I'll just say this way. When this guy tried to kill me, and that's what injured my right hand, my right wrist. I thought I sprained my wrist. Turns out I had 3 surgeries, 2 steel plates put in, and I was retired at the age of 33. I'm right-handed, and this is right hand. So you look to be close, you'll see the injuries. If you don't look close, you won't. But when the incident was going on, the thought came to my mind, Vincent, that this guy's trying to kill me, but I'm going to die, and it's not going to be tonight, and it won't be because of what that guy does. At that point, I was ready to do whatever it took to survive. Yeah,
so for me, I was working as a patrol sergeant, and particularly violent scene going on in the center of the city. I intervened. There was a suspect who was fleeing in what turns out to be a stolen vehicle, and I didn't really have that choice to fight or not fight. He, as I was trying to get a hold of some of the other officers, he aimed his car directly at me, turned the wheel, and hit the gas. He hit me, but there was a moment. And there's a video of it that I can point to, and I have in court, of the one moment, the exact moment that I thought I was dead, and all those thoughts came through me. And next thing you know, I'm 150, 200 feet down the road after he dragged me.
And that's something we hear about. Look, that was going on when I was a cop in the 80s. And people use cars as weapons all the time. They act like it's a recent thing. So what I found out is through my retirement process and my ultimate fight for my retirement was that people don't look at a car as a weapon. They just kept calling it an accident, like it was an accident. It was a car accident. The accident you were involved in. So I got into that habit of doing that until one day I was at a trauma support group, and someone leaned over, a new person, and pointed at me and said, "This is not an accident. Why are you calling it an accident?" This is called an on purpose. That's what we called them, on purposes. They try to, for lack of better words, they try to kill you with the vehicle.
Yeah, no, he pled guilty to using his vehicle as a weapon. He admitted to doing that in an attempt to kill me. Now, whether it's, suicide by cop and all those things, that could be, those are some of the words that were thrown around in court. But he specifically pled guilty and was sentenced for using his vehicle as a weapon to kill me. By the way, I was a uniformed police officer in the city of Lowell who was almost killed in the line of duty. I was a uniformed sergeant and patrol sergeant, and the same thing with a stolen car. And it was the same thing. Yeah, I mean, I think, going through this retirement process, people just kept calling it an accident, and we refused to acknowledge that this was, one, a deliberate attempt on my life, and two, that it was a dangerous weapon. And I almost, as bad as it sounds, want to say to people is like, you stand on the road and let me do the same to you, and you tell me how you feel about that if you survive it, right? So. Right. It's become highly politicized. But the point I'm getting at, and before we get a break, Vincent, because I want to talk a little bit about your career before you got hurt, is that people, they love to pass judgment. And number one, they weren't there. I think you made a key point. Let me hit you with a car and find out. You tell me whether it's debilitating or not. And we're talking about Vincent Fernandez. He's retired from the Lowell, Massachusetts Police Department. He was injured in line of duty, which we'll return to that conversation in a few moments. He's retired. He has lifelong disabling injuries, and he's here to talk about unfairness in state laws and his retirement process, some of which may shock you. If you're on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app,
be sure to look for me and follow me. My name's John, the letter J, Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y. You can also search for @LET Radio Show. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
They say that it's not about how much you earn, it's about how much you save. And that is partially true. If you can take some of that savings and turn it into high-yield investments, you are way ahead of the game. Get more details on how you can get started at letsavings.com, letsavings.com. Again, that's letsavings.com.
Current conversation with Vincent Fernandez. He's retired from the Lowell, Massachusetts Police Department. Police sergeant, retired sergeant. And by the way, hello, Sarge. Good. It's been a long time since someone called me that. He was injured in line of duty. We'll talk about that in a few moments. He's retired. Lifelong injuries. And he's going to talk about unfairness in state laws and retirement. A website that he's an active member of, vipo911.org. That's VIPO911.org. First of all, how long, let's talk about your police career. How long ago did you start? And you said you retired about 10 years ago.
Yeah, so I started in 1996, and I officially retired in 2018.
Gotcha. And you did, if you're like me, by the way, I started in 1980, retired in 1992. So I was retired a long time before you even started policing.
Yeah, you were, but I mean, it goes quick too. So
it does. And here's the thing I tell people all the time: I'm a Neanderthal. I'm an old school cop, and I'm a revolver cop. That's how long ago it was. And I'll be the type of guy where I'm 85 years old in an old folks' home. People go, "Shh, there's 5-0," and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I coming on in '96, there were a lot of guys who were from the 70s, right? They were 20 years into their career, right? And I was kind of on that tail end of that whole group of people when community policing was coming into. So I was kind of it was a hybrid, right? A hybrid of new age thinking and, what I would consider old school policing, right?
Right.
And, I get the whole revolver things. There were a lot of stories from some of those guys about carrying the old revolvers and things of that nature. We
had old nightsticks. We called S-Bantoons is where we used them, and they were table legs is really what they were. The department issued a little balsa thing, and they didn't do any good. And the mace, we had mace, and the old cops say that only works on innocent bystanders and police. Never spray that stuff.
It's a lot of truth to that. We've used it a lot, in my 22 years. It was the only non-lethal for a very long time that we had accessible. But yeah, there's a lot of overspray. It affects everybody around.
It does.
And there's some stories about that as well.
So in your career, would it be safe to say that, look, if you're like me, you're proud of your police career?
Yeah, I was very proud of it. There's a picture my parents had. I was probably 3 years old, sitting under the Christmas tree, holding an old LAPD Cruiser black and white, little battery operated thing, kind of like one Adam 12, one of those, right?
Yeah.
And I joke with people that's when my career started, right? That's when that idea. I grew up watching those shows, and the idea of doing that and putting the uniform on is all I ever wanted to do.
I'm the same way, and he's a big influence on me going to policing because I originally wanted to be a Catholic priest, and I went to a seminary and I don't have that calling. But police work was right behind it. And Joseph Wamba, his novels and his movies really had a lot to do with me going to policing. Yeah,
no, I agree. A lot of things like that had a lot of a big influence on me growing up. So, at a certain point, my whole life was geared towards pointing myself in that direction. In 1996, I graduated the academy.
Is it fair to say, because I always say this, that people say they knew what they signed up for. It was far more traumatic and far more violent than I realized.
Yeah, and when I was getting promoted and they sent us to these promotional classes, I remember saying that if there was anybody who was unprepared for the job, that was me, because I held that idealistic version of being a police officer. Mm-hmm. That shining badge and the little kids running up to you and people respecting you. And when I got there, it was everything but that, right? It was hard. It was very violent, understanding that. And, you're right. We chose this job, but we don't always choose what happens to us on this job. And
That's
I think
exactly right.
That's a very big difference.
I want to go into your career. How long were you a police officer before you got promoted to sergeant?
So 20 years. Yeah, I spent 20 years in patrol. I worked the overnights for my entire career, which, looking back on it, that was a tough stretch. But as I got older and had a family, it afforded us that time together and more time with my children. And I think, as you know and understand, that being a police officer and having a family, it's tough. And, you want to spend as much time with them as possible. So, yeah, I worked the overnight. We were the smallest shift, and per person, we were the busiest shift.
Oh, yeah. Overnights, I used to hate. 4 to 12, I loved overnights. We did, 8-hour shifts, so we changed every 28 days. But midnights up to about 3 o'clock in the morning were hot, and then they die off. Then they get quiet. And I had a really hard time with that. The 4 to 12s, they were nonstop. They were just go from Jump Street.
Yeah, no, same way for us. I think it's pretty common, right? So, from the start of your shift to 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, depending on the year, summertime, weekends, things like that, that may extend it into the earlier morning hours. But there was a 2-hour span, maybe 3-hour span where things would get quiet. And sometimes you wanted that, right? Because you had paperwork and you needed to catch your breath and you needed to kind of sort things out. And I think those things are really important when you are on patrol, is being able to take that moment and recognize that moment when you need to take it.
And being promoted to sergeant, for me, it was a very big deal. Was it a big deal for you?
Oh, it was a huge deal, right? Like, for me, for a long time, I wasn't a great student. I went to college and did that stuff, but I was never a great student. For me, taking that test was so daunting, right? You spend 8 months to a year studying, and for us, I can't even remember, but it's, back then it was hundreds and hundreds of dollars for books, and there were 8 or 10 books that you had to read, and you had to know all that stuff, and it was an ordeal. So when you got to that point and you were going to get promoted, it was a big deal. And, my kids were old enough. They were 10 and 6, I think, at the time, and it was a big deal. They were proud. I have pictures of them, me and them at the ceremony, and it was just a great moment. I think that's what you strive for when you start this career.
And when I got promoted to sergeant, I was like, I was going to be the guy that this going to make a difference, and I was going to be the sergeant. I was going to be and one of the things I tell people all the time is, look, I didn't go easy on the cops. I protected them. I took care of them. But you want to make sure they do the right job and they're prepared all the time. And that making sure they're okay was never easy.
Yeah, so I looked at it for the same way that I wanted, in a couple different ways. Like, one, I wanted, I think in our career we can look back and say, there were bosses and sergeants or whatnot that were like, yeah, I could have used a little something else from that person. So on one hand, I wanted to be that type of sergeant that when someone looked back on, they're like, he was there for me when I needed him.
Right.
And that was my premise for being a patrolman. Like, if you needed me, I was there. Regardless of what the cost for me was, if you needed me, I was always going to be there. And as a supervisor, that was my goal, was to be the person that you could count on when you needed it the most.
And I want to say this, and I'm not saying this to cast aspersions on you. This is more my story than anybody else. And a lot of guests I've had, I realized that the most important people were my wife and children, and they were the ones I gave the least amount of myself to.
Yeah. So I think over time, as the career began to grind me down after, closing in on 20 years, I think that I became less present in more of a mental health ways, right? But I always wanted, I stayed on the overnight shift so that I could sacrifice the sleep, but spend as much time with them as humanly possible. And that was what was important.
No, we got to take a short break. We're talking about Vincent Fernandez. He's retired from the Lowell, Massachusetts Police Department. He was injured in line of duty, which we'll talk about in a few moments. He was retired. He's got lifelong disabling injuries, and he's here to talk about unfairness in state laws and retirement. Website, you can get more details about what he does, the organization he does a lot of work with, vipo911.org. That's VIPO911.org. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're going to take a short break. I promise you we will be right back. How would you like to improve your health? Let's get healthy. Tips you can use today for free. They don't require any money at all. You can download a free ebook, 15 Tips to Improve Your Health, at lethealthy.com. That's lethealthy.com. Again, it's lethealthy.com, and let's get healthy for free. Turn conversation with Vincent Fernandez. Vincent's retired from the Lowell, Massachusetts Police Department. Police sergeant. He was injured in the line of duty, which we'll talk about in a few moments. He was retired, has lifelong disabling injuries, and is here also to talk about unfairness in state laws and retirement process. A lot of people don't understand that. Website he does a lot of work with, vipo911.org. That's VIPO911.org. I want to go to the day you were hurt, Vincent. You talked about it a little bit in the first segment. Can you elaborate more?
Yeah, so I was on patrol as a sergeant, and I was in the downtown area of the city, and that is where the biggest cluster of, bars and things of that nature are, typically on the weekends. It was a Friday night. It's, at closing time, it's typically really, really busy with people everywhere. I turned the corner on one of the streets, and there was this large fight going on in the middle of the street, probably 15, 20 people, and more people running towards it. So I stopped my cruiser and got out and radioed it in.
But there was a point where you got hurt, because that sounds like something you and I do all the time.
Yeah, and again, right. So that's not something that was out of the ordinary. That was, that was very, if we use the word, we know there's nothing routine, but routine. Those
right.
are the things that we did on weekends. And at some point, more units started to arrive. Some of the backup came, some plainclothes guys, some uniform patrol guys, and girls, I should say, as well. And they, as we're separating everybody and we're trying to figure out who the victims are, a few people come running up to me and they're like, "You've got to stop that car. You got to stop that car." And I look and they're pointing at this white car that just turned the corner. And there's only one way to go because the cruisers are blocking one end of the street. And oddly enough, the white car had blood all over the hood of the car. And obviously not understanding or not knowing what the full extent of what was going on, stopping the car became a priority. So with my back to a bunch of cars that were parked along the side of the street, I began to motion for the other officers to try to stop the car. And you probably understand that when you're on the radio and things are busy, it's hard to get airtime.
Right.
So we trying to broadcast that was really difficult. But as I'm doing that, I look up and all of a sudden you hear the engine of the car rev and he starts speeding. And then all of a sudden you can see the slight correction in the car and he's pointing the car at me. I have no place to go because my back's to a parked car, and he hits me. The force of him hitting me propels me up under the hood of the car with my left leg still dragging onto the ground. And my right hand actually went up under the windshield wiper and got stuck. So even if I wanted to, I couldn't pull my hand out, so I couldn't dislodge myself and try to roll off the car. He sped up as my feet were bouncing on the cobblestone road. It's an old cobblestone road. And he was trying to sideswipe a car with me on it. At some point, I was able to kind of half roll up, so I missed the car that he was trying to hit. And then at the end of the road, he took a sharp left and the windshield wiper broke. And I got thrown from the car. I hit the ground, smashed my head on the cobblestones, and I probably rolled another 15 or 20 feet, where a bystander actually found me laying there, semi-unconscious.
And I imagine that EMTs were called and you were transported to the hospital, all that stuff.
Yeah, I was. I was transferred to the hospital, treated at the hospital. And then, as sad as this sounds, all of that was the easiest part of this whole thing.
That's the part I'm getting at. And before we get into what happens afterwards, when did you become aware of what the diagnosis and prognosis was and whether your police career was over or not?
So that took months to figure out. I woke up the next day with this really, really bad headache. It's been 10 years, and I've had a headache ever since. it took months for them to understand that I had a traumatic brain injury. 10 years ago, the thought, much like PTSD, people were beginning to understand the impact of these injuries on people, but they still weren't there with like, hey, this needs to be treated a certain way, and this could be devastating, or this has long-term effects. It was, and especially within the department, it was, oh, it's just a concussion. Why can't you come back to work?
Right.
Over the course of those months, some of my other injuries began to kind of pop up. Remember, my primary care doctor said, listen, there's a lot going on, and over time, it's going to take time for us to really understand what's going on with you. So within, a day, the headache started. Within a week, those headaches turned to just nonstop migraines. I couldn't function, couldn't talk. I couldn't move. And then, we can fast forward 2 or 3 months, and it got worse. I was having trouble with my memory. I was having trouble reading. Obviously, when I'm talking now, it's still a lasting effect with my working memory. I couldn't read, I couldn't write legibly. And one day I talked about this a lot, is that, my daughter finds me and hysterically crying, and she's 10, 11 years old at the time, and I forgot how to tie my shoes. Couldn't tie my shoes.
Yeah.
She had to tie my shoes for me. And that's really when it became apparent, slowly over time, that there was something significantly bad going on with me. So it took a little bit.
And you got these significant injuries. And by the way, traumatic brain injuries are not discussed in the 10, 15 years ago with policing. It just wasn't. And PTSD still, people, a lot of departments, especially in the East Coast, they don't want to have the conversation.
Yeah, so both of them go hand in hand for me, right? I mean, it took me years to understand that I also had PTSD. And to this day, I know they've made great efforts, and I know a lot of people who have done some great work with first responders when it comes to PTSD. But through all of this, I've not only met people with PTSD, I've met people with traumatic brain injuries like myself. And those things were just disregarded. Like, the old dreaded soft tissue injury, right? There used to be that
Right.
joke about like, well, you can't prove it, you might as well retire. And that's simply not the case. I have permanent brain damage. And at that time, with work, they only wanted to know about, why can't you go back to work? What's going on with your brain? Why can't you go back to work? And so there was no more thought put into what the devastating effects of almost being killed in the line of duty were.
And by the way, and I'm not saying it's an anti-police thing, but there is a big difference in the way they treat line of duty deaths and those injured. And those injured, you got a spot to fill. They want you back.
Yeah, you're a number, right? I know recently I'd met a Mass State Trooper, and, he had gone through a similar incident where he had suffered a really devastating traumatic brain injury about 8 years ago. And at some point, they realized at like 5 months, they decided to retire him because they made the decision that he wasn't coming back to work. And in my incident, it was, they would send me to their staff doctor for the city and to determine why I couldn't come back to work. Right. So all the doctor's notes that I had from my own doctors weren't enough.
And on that note, we're going to take a short break. We're talking about Vincent Fernandez, who retired Lowell, Massachusetts Police Department police sergeant, injured in line of duty, which we'll talk about in a few moments. More so, the retirement process and how, for lack of better words, he got screwed over. And it happens to police all across the United States, not just Massachusetts, everywhere. One of the websites he does a lot with is VIPO911.org. That's VIPO911.org. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're going to take a short break. We promise we will be right back.
Someone asked, what's the catch? What's the cost? There is no cost for anything on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast website. LETradio.com. LETradio.com. Again, that's LETradio.com.
Return to conversation with Vincent Fernandez, retired from the Lowell, Massachusetts Police Department, a police sergeant, retired from line of duty injuries, lifelong injuries, which we'll talk about in a few more moments. He's here talking about unfairness in state laws and his retirement process, where a lot of people don't understand, including myself at the time. A lot of work he does is at vipo911.org. That's VIPO911.org. Check out their website, get more details. One of the things that happened when I got retired is, look, I don't know about Massachusetts, but in Maryland and Baltimore, 66 2/3 of your pay. The big problem is when I was retired and the determination was made that I could not return to police work, and I was granted retirement. It was a long procedure. I'm shortening it. But the day I retired, my health insurance tripled. It became 1/3 of my pension. And my earning capability decreased tremendously because I didn't have the full pay anymore and I didn't have overtime. And a lot of the cops I worked with, they thought, oh, man, he hit the golden ticket. He got the retirement. And it wasn't like that at all. How was it for you?
You know, it's the same. I think it's 72% for us. You know, and I think what people get lost in the idea of like that golden ticket, and I would hear that as well. That's great. You're retired. Retirement process for me took 1.5 years. Same with you. You know, you take 72% of your pay, you cut that down between overtime. You know, we get paid to go to court. We would work construction details, all these things that factored into your lifestyle. I didn't live an extravagant lifestyle, but I had a 10 and a 6-year-old, 2 school-age children. And it just didn't translate to that. And your earning potential after you get a medical retirement, which what they call is an ADR, accidental disability. Obviously, I wasn't injured in an accident, but they saw fit that that's what they were going to offer me. And then your earning potential after that is, you know, next to nothing. So you can get a job, but you have to be healthy enough to actually even max out that part of that benefit. And in my case, it's been 10 years since I can even remotely say that I've been healthy enough. And
I know guys that are in wheelchairs and they couldn't work, and they live off ramen noodles because they can't work.
So I spent a year in a rehabilitation head injury program. I learned how to read, tie my shoes, do all these things. In the last 10 years, I've had 7 significant surgeries, 3 major spinal surgeries, and 14 medical procedures overall in the last 10 years. And presently, I am getting ready to undergo 2 more surgical procedures on my spine. Yeah. So that notion that this golden ticket and sitting in the sun or sitting in the shade and you know, getting this high-paying job, just it's not true. And that is, you know, that's a myth that people like to sell to people about this process.
My wife, who I met years after retiring from police work, could not believe some of the things that, and I want to say it wasn't a department. It wasn't the police department itself. It was the bean counters and workers' compensation. They were ruthless.
Yeah, so I think, you know, the hard reality for me was that the people that should have taken care of me didn't. Right. Nobody thought for a second what getting run over by a car in an attempt on my life, what that would do to me mentally and physically. And now, 10 years later, the hard truth is that they just didn't care what happened to me.
No, that's one way of putting it. That's probably the correct way of putting it. Listen, we constantly memorialize those who are killed, those who lost their lives in line of duty, and that's the appropriate thing to do. But we lose sight as an industry of those who get hurt. And by the way, I don't know about you, but I was taught from day one of the academy, 2 things I was taught: never give up, never quit, and we will always have your back. Well, guess what? They didn't have my back.
You know, first day of the academy, you were 100% correct. They showed us this video about never giving up, never quitting, never giving up the ghost, always fighting, right? And we'll have your back. Right, we'll be there. You know, that thin blue line, we'll always be there to pick you up when you need it. And, you know, again, I'm not bashing anyone in particular right now, but, you know, it's not true. It wasn't true in my case. And the people that were in charge, the people like you called them the bean counters, they just don't care. My wife, you know, at the time would call these people, city managers, law departments, administrative staff, and ask for help, including my own police department at one point, and ask for help. And she was told straight out that it wasn't their jobs to help me.
Right. And that's the reality.
A really hard pill to swallow.
It's really hard. And here's the thing I tell people all the time. especially about policing or firefighters or any kind of public service jobs. If you dedicate your whole life to that job, which is great, which I did, I loved the job, and I still do. If you die, they will have the help wanted ad before your obituary hits the newspaper.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same people that have ignored me would have been standing next to my wife had the unthinkable happen, and I didn't survive the incident.
I agree.
Because I did, and because I did, I've been forgotten. I've been relegated to a waste pile, if you will, and now I'm just a number. How much am I going to cost them if they help me out? If we ignore him, perhaps he'll go away. And the sad part is, these very people we've called relentlessly for 10 years, they won't even dignify me or my wife or any number of representatives that we've tried to get through to them to call us back. My life is so worthless to them that I don't even get a phone call back for them to tell me that they don't want to help me. They just ignore me.
And that's a bitter pill to swallow.
It's hard. I met, again, that same state trooper that I was talking to, and, he has a really great saying is that, he spent his life in service of helping people, and when he needed help, people turned their back on him.
That's what they do.
That's how I feel.
And
that's
by the way,
how I feel.
I don't know what the answers are. I know I've talked to Mario a few times, Mario Oliveira from VIPO 911. One of the things I would love to see is, look, I didn't ask to get hurt. I didn't ask for my career to be suddenly over. I had aspirations of doing 20 to 25 years and retiring on my own when I wanted to. I think that retired officers that get hurt in line of duty should get the full pay and full benefits.
And, I agree, right? Because we didn't ask for these things to happen for us. I didn't wake up that day and say, hey, I'm going to go find someone to try to kill me. Because the reality of the situation is that you have to survive these incidences, we survived them, right? We survived the unthinkable, and still nobody cares. And I think now we're just a number. We're relegated. For me, I was relegated to an ADR. I was told that's all that was available to me. But the truth is that there was a completely different retirement option that would do exactly what you say, and nobody wants to give it to me.
And that I want to say funny, not funny, but ironic. And it's the same organization you pledged your life to, and this is how they repay you.
I was told when we first brought it to the attention of the then chief, and he was fantastic in helping us try to get this through at City Hall. But one of the concerns was, and the concerns still are, is that if we give it to you, all these people are going to come out of the woodwork. Well, no, they're not, because it's a very narrow, definition of who qualifies for this. And by the way, if they're coming out of the woodwork to get this, then perhaps they deserve it.
Right.
So that notion that people are that I'm asking for a handle, that I'm trying to get something or get one over on them, that's how they treated me and still are treating me.
One thing is that we've got a long way to go. I'll just say this. I was told my entire career that we've got your back, we'll take care of your family. What that really meant is if I was killed in line of duty. If you're injured and your career's over, you're on your own. That's the reality. I would love to sugarcoat it and make it sound better than it is. It is not. Vincent, I want, by the way, you have a friend, you have a brother that went through similar. It's in Florida, and one of the reasons why I'm in Florida is because I steal plates in my right hand, and when they get cold, it goes right in the bone, and it's no good. I'm not a good person, but you are welcome here all the time in sunny South Florida. Vincent Fernandez, thanks for your service, and thanks for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Both very much appreciated.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate the opportunity.
I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or two or three. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.